Um, Picture this for a second. You are standing in the voting booth. Or, maybe you're hunched over your kitchen table with a mail-in ballot and a cup of coffee.
Yeah, you've got your pen ready.
Exactly. You look at the top of the ticket and you easily check the box for president or governor. You know who you want there. But then you start scanning down the ballot.
Right, the down ballot races.
Yeah, suddenly you're looking at races for state appellate judges, county district attorneys, the Municipal Soil and Water Conservation Board.
Things most people haven't thought about all year.
Never. And then come the ballot initiatives. You're staring at Proposition 4B, trying to figure out if voting yes means you are saving the local public parks or accidentally selling them to a billionaire developer.
Because the legal jargon is completely impenetrable.
It's practically a coin toss. I mean, you want to make a good, responsible decision, but you realize you're standing in the middle of a thick, heavy informational fog, and you just don't have the facts in front of you.
That's so common, right? Yet we almost never talk about it out loud in a democratic society.
We really don't.
We spend an enormous amount of energy debating access to the ballot box, getting people registered, keeping polling places open, mailing the ballots out. But we spend almost zero time talking about what happens in the mind of the voter once they actually have that ballot in their hand.
We just sort of assume the democratic magic happens on its own.
Exactly.
And that exact tension is what we are focusing on today. Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are exploring a brilliant policy essay from March 2026 by Lev Nemotin.
Published by the Uncompressed Thinking Channel.
Yes, and it's titled The Informed Voting: From Reflex Democracy to Deliberative Citizenship. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore a simple but incredibly provocative question that the author raises.
Which is such a great question.
If our democracy protects your right to vote so fiercely, shouldn't it also care about the informational conditions under which you make that choice? So, where does this whole concept of informed voting even start? Because it feels like a tall order to suddenly change how voters process information.
What's fascinating here is that this essay actually continues a line of thinking from Nemotin's previous work.
Oh, right, the polling paper.
Yes, a paper called The Polling Illusion. In that earlier piece, he argued that modern public opinion polling often captures quick, knee-jerk reflexes rather than thoughtful, considered judgment.
Like when a pollster calls someone out of the blue.
Exactly. They ask a complex policy question, and the person gives an answer based on fragmented memory, a recent headline, or just tribal cultural cues.
Just a gut reaction.
Right. And in this new essay, he extends that concern from polling to the actual democratic voting process itself. Elections can suffer the exact same fate. They can capture a reflex democracy rather than a deliberative one.
Okay, let's unpack this because the author highlights what he calls the core democratic paradox of our time. We treat the act of voting as a sacred, almost religious democratic ritual.
It's the absolute bedrock of our society.
It is. But the preparation for that sacred act, it's chaos, complete chaos.
Pure noise.
We expect voters to make these massive sovereign decisions about the future of their communities, but the information they're given to make those decisions is a hurricane of 30-second attack ads, simplified slogans, partisan media shouting matches.
And whatever fragmented social media posts happen to cross their feed that day.
Right. The act of voting is sacred, but
Yeah.
the informational preparation is completely casual and highly manipulable.
The text is very quick to point out a massive caveat here, though. Anytime you start talking about informed voting or civic preparation, you have to proceed with extreme historical humility.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Historically, whenever the political system started talking about qualified or informed voters, it was usually a weapon.
It was.
It was a thinly veiled excuse to keep certain marginalized people out of the voting booth entirely. Isn't any push for informed voting just a risk of bringing back literacy tests?
The essay confronts that fear head-on. We cannot have this conversation without confronting the ghost of exclusion in American history. And he draws a very bright, non-negotiable moral and constitutional line here.
The arc of American democracy has been about dismantling those exclusionary barriers.
Exactly. The text walks through this history carefully. We saw the expansion of the franchise through the 15th Amendment addressing race, the 19th Amendment for sex.
The 24th Amendment banning poll taxes.
Right, and the 26th Amendment lowering the voting age to 18. The author also points to the landmark Supreme Court case, Harper versus Virginia Board of Elections.
That struck down the logic of poll taxes.
Yes, and critically, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which explicitly outlawed literacy tests and similar discriminatory devices.
So Neymotin is acknowledging that history to ensure his proposal doesn't accidentally repeat it.
He takes an incredibly hard line. The system must never, ever return to literacy tests, knowledge exams, or any kind of proxy test for civic worth.
Universal suffrage is the unconditional floor of democracy.
That is the baseline. The question we should be asking is no longer who is worthy to vote. The new question is, what does a serious democracy owe the voter before asking for a decision?
It's a shift from gating the voter to actually supporting the voter. Let's look at why that support is so desperately needed right now. The text brings in some cold, hard numbers to illustrate the modern fog of governance.
The data is pretty striking.
Think about the last national report card we got on civic knowledge. The essay cites the 2025 Annenberg Constitution Day survey. It found that while 70% of Americans can name the three branches of government, less than half can name most of the First Amendment rights beyond free speech.
The data on the younger generation reflects a similar struggle with foundational knowledge. The 2022 National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP data,
Right?
that showed 8th grade civic scores actually declined, with only 22% of students performing at or above the proficient level.
The author makes a crucial point here, though. These numbers do not mean citizens are unintelligent or incapable of democratic judgment.
Not at all. People are just busy living their lives.
They're working two jobs, raising kids, trying to pay the mortgage. Keeping up with the minutiae of modern government is practically a full-time job in itself. And because voters aren't getting clear, structured information delivered to them efficiently, they are forced to rely on understandable human shortcuts.
And those shortcuts are the engine of reflex democracy.
Right.
When you don't have a clear institutional understanding of what a district attorney does or what a specific ballot initiative actually changes in the law, you fall back on proxies.
You look at the party label next to the name.
You vote based on cultural affinity or just the general vibes of a campaign narrative.
Modern political campaigns know this perfectly well. That is why they spend billions of dollars focusing on telling voters what to feel rather than helping them understand what is actually institutionally at stake.
Which brings us to the proposed solution. Neymotin breaks down democratic participation into a three-layer structure.
Layer one is exactly what we just covered. The right to vote. This is the constitutional core, unconditional for every eligible citizen.
Moving to layer two, access to information.
Because having the right to vote isn't enough if the information you need to make a choice is buried in a 100-page legal PDF on a confusing county website from 1998.
Exactly. The essay highlights some excellent work already being done here by the Election Assistance Commission, the EAC, specifically their 2024 Voter Education Design Toolkit.
The EAC uses this bite snack meal approach to information design, which sounds great in theory. A 30-second overview is the bite, a 2-minute comparison is the snack, and a full detailed guide is the meal.
It's a great framework.
But let's be realistic. Who actually has the time to consume the meal option? A dense voter guide is still a dense voter guide. Doesn't this just benefit political junkies who already have the time and resources to study up?
That is exactly the limitation of layer two. The EAC does fantastic work making things readable, and they place a massive emphasis on disability inclusion and language access.
Which is vital.
It is, because if information is only accessible to affluent English-speaking voters, you don't have informational equality. But you are right. Even perfectly designed information is still passive.
It just sits there.
It sits there waiting for the voter to find it. That is why the essay introduces layer three, informed decision.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Layer 3 isn't just about putting information out into the ether and hoping a busy voter stumbles across it. It is about building a civic architecture that actively helps orient you, the voter, right before you cast your ballot.
Neymotin outlines a concrete blueprint for what this looks like in practice, breaking it down into 4 specific elements.
Let's go through them. Element 1 is a universal civic information package.
Before you vote, you should have access to a standardized, plain language guide that explains exactly what an office actually does.
Think about a state utility regulator or a county sheriff.
What powers do they actually have? Where do their limits lie? And for those confusing ballot measures we talked about earlier, what exact legal change will this make?
Not the campaign rhetoric about saving the parks or destroying the economy.
Right, but a neutral, concrete, election-facing orientation of the legal facts.
That immediately solves the Soil and Water Conservation Board panic in the voting booth. Element 2 builds on that, and honestly, this might be the most psychologically relieving part of the whole proposal: standardized candidate capsules.
This is huge.
Right now, trying to compare two candidates for a local office is impossible. One candidate has a 50-page policy white paper on their slick website, and the other candidate is just posting viral internet memes on social media. You're trying to compare apples to bicycles. It's exhausting.
It is entirely asymmetrical. The essay proposes a comparable disclosure format to fix this. To get on the ballot, or to be included in the official voter guide, candidates would provide a standardized capsule.
Like a structured resume.
Yes, their biography, their public record, and their stated stances on a fixed set of issues relevant to that specific office. The system isn't telling candidates what their ideology should be. It is simply forcing a standardized presentation so that you, the voter, can actually make a direct side-by-side comparison.
It lowers the cognitive load on the voter immensely, and it makes manipulative, emotion-driven campaigning significantly harder to pull off.
So we have the neutral office guides and the standardized candidate capsules.
Element 3 is the optional informed voter module. This sounds like an active intervention.
This is the modern equivalent of the briefing layer from his previous work on polling. Think of it as a brief, 5 to 10 minute guided orientation.
How does a voter actually use it?
You could access it via a QR code on your phone while you're standing in line at the firehouse waiting to vote. Or you could do it through the mail or at a kiosk in the public library.
Just a quick primer.
It simply says, before you decide, here's a short, neutral orientation to what this election is actually about. And crucially, it is entirely optional. You don't have to do it to vote.
That optional part is key, especially when we get to element 4. I can already hear alarm bells going off for some people when they hear this one. Element 4 is advisory comprehension prompts.
Ah, yes.
Wait a second. Prompts. That sounds an awful lot like a test. What happens if I click the wrong answer on a prompt about the mayor's powers? Does the touch screen lock me out?
Never. The word advisory is the most important word in that entire concept. These are brief prompts after you review the module, just to check understanding.
So what happens if I get it wrong?
If you answered incorrectly, it simply triggers a refresher or politely suggests you review the material again. It never, under any circumstances, blocks the ballot.
The author is adamant about this.
Absolutely. The moment a comprehension check becomes a barrier to casting a ballot, it becomes an unconstitutional literacy test. But as long as it remains purely advisory, it becomes a supportive civic aid. It's a tool for your benefit to make sure you didn't misunderstand a confusingly worded ballot measure. It is not a gatekeeper for your rights.
Okay, I see the distinction, but let's deal with the elephant in the room. The absolute biggest objection to this entire framework. Who writes the briefing?
The neutrality problem.
Exactly. In modern politics, the framing of an issue is everything. A single adjective can completely change how a voter perceives the ballot measure. One side might call a bill a vital tax relief measure, while the other side calls it a devastating revenue reduction measure.
And both statements might technically be factually accurate depending on how you look at the budget.
But they produce totally different emotional reactions in the voter. Bias is everywhere, so how on earth do we solve the neutrality problem?
The author acknowledges that this is the strongest, most valid objection to the proposal. Strictly speaking, perfect philosophical neutrality is impossible. Human beings have biases.
Of course.
But, he argues, the impossibility of perfection is not an excuse for passivity. We don't have perfectly infallible courts, but we still build judicial procedures and rules of evidence to reduce arbitrariness. We don't have perfectly unbiased journalism, but journalistic standards and fact-checking departments still matter.
So what is the actual institutional design that protects these voter capsules from being hijacked by a partisan bureaucrat?
He proposes an independent, transparent civic information board. And the key mechanism here is adversarial review.
Adversarial review. Make that concrete for me.
Think of it a bit like the editing process for a highly contentious Wikipedia article, but formalized, hyper-regulated, and legally binding.
Okay.
Drafts of these information capsules would be made entirely public well before the election. Candidates would have the explicit right to object to how their own positions are summarized.
So they get a say.
Yes. Civil society organizations from across the political spectrum could challenge the language if they feel it skews one way or another. It's essentially forcing all the competing interests into a room to fight over the adjectives until they arrive at a stripped-down, fact-based consensus.
And if they still can't agree?
Ultimately, judicial review would be available for serious, unresolved disputes. Transparency isn't just a buzzword here. It is the absolute prerequisite for the system to have any legitimacy in the eyes of the public.
It's ambitious, but is there any real-world evidence that this kind of structured, neutral information actually changes how people engage with politics? Or are people just going to vote for their team no matter what the capsule says?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, there is actually a remarkably robust body of research supporting this. The essay points to Stanford University's Deliberative Democracy Lab and their extensive work on what they call deliberative polling.
Break down how a deliberative poll actually works. What's the before and after?
They take a representative, scientifically selected sample of everyday citizens and poll them on a contentious issue, say energy policy or healthcare. That gives you their baseline reflex opinion.
Right.
Then they bring these citizens together, give them highly balanced, thoroughly vetted briefing materials, and provide opportunities for moderated, small group discussion with their peers, as well as Q&A sessions with competing experts.
So they actually have to sit with the complexity of the issue for a while.
Yes, and after they've had the time to digest the structured information and deliberate, they pull them again.
Then what happens?
The metrics are stunning. What they consistently find is that when citizens are given the time, the structure, and the neutral information to truly understand an issue, their opinions often shift significantly.
They actually change their minds.
They become far less polarized. They demonstrate a much higher grasp of the trade-offs involved in policy decisions. It proves that our current democratic preferences aren't just fixed, angry, tribal reactions waiting to be extracted by pollsters.
Citizens can and do become more considered and thoughtful when placed under better civic conditions.
Exactly.
That is incredibly hopeful. It shows the capacity is there. But Stanford is a controlled lab environment with a selected group of people. Rolling out an independent civic information board, dealing with adversarial review, and distributing standardized modules to 150 million voters in a chaotic swing state during a presidential election sounds like an absolute logistical nightmare. You could break the entire electoral system if you rush this.
Nemotin agrees entirely. He explicitly states that a reform this sensitive, dealing with the core machinery of democracy, should never begin with a sudden national mandate.
It would be a disaster.
It has to begin with pilot programs.
You have to start small. Test the waters before you dive in. The essay suggests trying this out first in local elections, like school board races or municipal referenda, where the information gap is usually the highest anyway.
You pilot the architecture locally to answer some very pragmatic, hard questions. Did the voters who use the module actually understand the office better? Did they feel more confident distinguishing between the candidates?
And you have to monitor the downsides.
Crucially, you have to test the data to ensure that the orientation module didn't inadvertently depress voter turnout in any specific demographic group. If adding a 5-minute QR code module makes single parents abandon the voting line because it takes too long, the system has failed.
You have to ensure that the design choices didn't accidentally create an ideological skew in the results.
Right. You pilot it to see what formats build the most accessibility, efficiency, and trust.
Test, measure, refine. Because at the end of the day, a reform that only works in a theoretical academic essay is utterly useless. It has to work for busy, distracted, sometimes cynical people waiting in line at a local community center on a rainy Tuesday morning.
It has to meet voters where they actually are, dealing with the realities of human attention spans.
It must work with modern behavioral constraints, not pretend they don't exist. If it requires everyone to suddenly become a policy scholar, it's a fantasy.
It really is.
So what does this all mean? We've covered a massive amount of ground today. We started with the dark history of exclusionary literacy tests, waded through the modern informational fog of vibes-based social media campaigning, and broke down Nemotin's proposed architecture of civic information boards and standardized candidate capsules.
It's a lot to take in.
But if we boil it all down, the core takeaway for you, the listener, is this. A mature, serious democracy should do more than simply unlock the doors to the polling place. It shouldn't just hand you a ballot full of legal jargon and abandon you to the chaos.
It should actively help you navigate that fog.
Yes. It should provide a clear, neutral, accessible path to comprehension so that when you exercise your sovereign power as a citizen, you are doing it with genuine clarity and confidence, not just taking a wild guess.
It's the transition from a democracy that is merely satisfied with handing out equal ballots to a democracy that actively demands equal civic orientation. And this raises an important question, something really fascinating for you to consider as we wrap up.
What's that?
We've spent this entire time talking about how this informed voting framework changes the experience for you, the voter in the booth. But think about the other side of the equation. If an informed voting system actually became the norm, if standardized, neutral information capsules were guaranteed to reach every single voter right before they cast their ballots,
Oh, wow.
how would the multi-billion-dollar political campaign industry be forced to change its advertising strategies overnight to adapt to a newly oriented, highly informed electorate?
Now that is a brilliant thought experiment. If voters can't be as easily manipulated by 30-second attack ads and vague slogans, the campaigns have to fundamentally change the way they generate the political weather.
They might actually have to start arguing the facts.
We will leave you to ponder that one on your own. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep demanding clarity in your own civic lives, and we will see you next time.